Hi everyone, welcome back to the Chinatown sketch. This is where I'm going to color this with watercolor. If you are a supporter of my Patreon page, you have access to the full-length tutorial. The link is in the video description below. And if you are not, you can enjoy this time lapse, but do consider supporting me on my Patreon page because that is what helps me put out all these tutorials. Let's talk about the sketch first. Because I had to rush off to the office after the sketch, I tried to complete this as quickly as possible, and it was a really hot day. It was 33 degrees while I was sketching this. I was actually sweating profusely. So the weather does affect my drawing, especially when it's very hot weather. I tend to draw a bit quicker because I want to get out of the heat. So the sketch would look a bit looser. And also sometimes there are inaccuracy because I'm sketching too fast. Sometimes I make mistakes. But generally speaking, for a sketch like this, if you want it to be accurate, you can use pencil lines to basically just block out the general shape of the perspective lines, which are this line here, this and this. So let's compare that to a reference photo to see if I have gotten them correct. So let's look at the roof on the left side. The angle is quite close. As for the roof here, I can see from my photo that this is a bit steeper. It could be my camera lens, or it could be that I did not draw this correctly. And the angle for this line here, it's quite close, so I got this part wrong. And there were actually a lot of people yesterday, but they were all walking very fast. So in my sketch, most of the people, I actually drew them just standing around. So this is how I draw very simplified people, basically just a head, one triangle, and two legs. These are windows for the buildings. For these windows, there are actually the horizontal openings, like for example here, but I did not draw them in just to make it a bit more abstract, because when it's further away it's very difficult to see the detail, and if you cannot see the detail, sometimes you don't have to draw it in even though you know that it's there. I did not complete this part here because there was actually a big concrete block blocking this whole section. So part of this was actually sketched from my imagination, but I know roughly how the windows, how this tent is going to look like, so I just drew it across. But here it's very difficult for me to imagine because this is actually a shop front and that concrete was actually blocking the shop front. So I don't know how it looks like, so I just left it blank here. And here there are some empty spaces. There are actually a lot of items that are being sold here at the stores, and there are a lot of details there, but it's very difficult for me to see the details, and this whole area is actually in the shadow area. So because I cannot see the detail, I did not draw them in, but I'm going to color all this area black later on. Let's take a look at the reference photo again to see the colors that I'm going to use today. There is yellow, some spots of yellow, there is a lot of red, and this looks like some fire engine red to me. For the sky, it looks very cloudy, but I'm going to use phthalo blue to color the sky. And this looks like a gray tone to me, and there's a lot of dark shadows here. So for the dark shadows, I'm going to be using ultramarine with burnt sienna to create the shadows, and for the road, I'm going to use a lighter wash of ultramarine and burnt sienna. There is some green here, so I might actually mix this green with the yellow and phthalo blue. So those would be the colors that I'm going to use today. Okay, so the colors are Hansa yellow. This is some red color, I cannot remember the name. Ultramarine, burnt sienna is one of these two, and phthalo blue. So that would be 5 colors. I'm going to start with phthalo blue first to basically draw the clouds. So I'm going to put some colors here. Just a very light wash of phthalo blue. I'm going to add some red to it, just a tiny hint of red so that it's not so striking. Alright, and now I can add some of the colors here. I'm going to work very quickly. Now the edges here are quite hard, so I'm going to use my tissue paper to basically just soften some of the edges so that they look like clouds. It's a bit difficult to do because this dries a bit too fast, so I need to work a bit faster. So let me put my palette here and try it on this side. So watercolor is about experimentation. Sometimes if you feel like doing something different, just go ahead and do it because you might actually learn something new. So let me do this again before it dries. I think this paper, I think it actually dries too fast. Or I can try to use this tissue paper and basically just dip it into the paint and paint with this. So that might be quite interesting. And let's see how it's going to appear when I do that. I have to be careful not to go over the building behind. And for this side here as well, just to try to make the clouds softer. So the blue area is actually the sky, the white area should be the cloud. And I'm done with that. I want to add some hard edges here. So the next color I'm going to add is yellow. I start with the lighter colors first. Sometimes I like to block in bigger shapes first, but sometimes I like to start with lighter colors first. So today I try to block in the bigger shapes first. And I'm going to use yellow straight from the pen like this, because the lanterns, they are actually quite bright. Perhaps again a tint of red so that that yellow is not that glaring. Notice that I'm not coloring very careful. I just basically just swipe my brush across the lantern area. This is a very loose sketch, so I'm not using a lot of accuracy. Also, if I'm going to be drawing this on location, it's going to be a very hot day. I will be working very fast as well. And when I'm on location, I will not be using the tissue to block out the clouds because that's a bit inconvenient. I like to just use my brush and watercolor palette to do that. I can add yellow, just throw in some yellow here and there, it doesn't matter much. Just to make the drawing a bit balanced, you can add some yellow here and there, even if the color doesn't appear at those specific locations. The paint that I'm using today is Mission Gold. I'm not sure what this red is. It might be called primary red, I'm not too sure. And let's try it out at this area here. So the roof is supposed to be red. And because this area here is under the shadow, it's going to be very dark. I'm just using this red straight from the pen to basically just color the roof. I think it works well. And the lanterns, the windows on this building, they are also red, so I'm just going to color them red as well, and they are going to blend into the lantern because the lantern is also red. So I'm sketching very casually today, the same that I would be doing if I'm sketching out on location. I can add some burnt sienna for some variation. So when I add burnt sienna, it dulls down the red. But for the lanterns, I would still want to use the red straight from the pen. So perhaps for the windows, I would add some burnt sienna. So I'm just adding some splotches here and there. And this guy is the fortune god. So just be a bit careful when coloring his clothing. And his friend here is Santa Claus. It's a weird combination. I guess the shop owner likes Santa Claus because he's wearing red too. It's quite interesting. I think it's this sort of little details, these interesting things that you see on location that makes your sketch looks more lively and interesting. So some of the people, they are wearing red as well. The stalls, they are actually mostly using red tables with red cloth, so I'm just going to color that very quickly. Oops, I accidentally put some red here on that tent there. More red windows here, so I'm just going to quickly color all those red windows with a quick swipe of my brush. I have to make sure that I color everything so that I don't have to go back again to color later on. So let me put some red into the background. Alright, I think I'm almost done with the red color. Alright, so now the sky is dry. Let me just wipe off some of the paper from the tissue. Alright, I'm done with red, and now I'm going to mix the skin tone for some of the people where I can see them. So for skin tones, I usually use yellow ochre with a touch of red. Just dab the paint onto their faces. Even though from this sketch I wasn't actually really able to see any faces, so for some of them I do. Now before I add shadow, I want to put the green lines here. So for the green lines, I'm going to mix my own green using yellow, and let's try French ultramarine because I'm going to be using ultramarine later. So let's try it here. Let me add a drop of water to ultramarine so that I can dissolve this quickly. And I also want to add a drop of water to my burnt sienna so that I can dissolve that as well. I'm going to put burnt sienna here and ultramarine right up there, so that when I use ultramarine later on, and if I want to switch to burnt sienna to get that gradation, I can quickly just dab the paint there. Dab the paintbrush there. Alright, so now for the road. To give it some variation, I'm going to put in some of the red that I mixed earlier on, just to give it a nice purple tone. So this road is actually a blend of ultramarine and the red and some burnt sienna. This tentage here is actually blue, so I'm going to use burnt sienna. I'm going to use ultramarine. And when it's dry, I'm going to add the shadow here because it's quite dark actually. Now some of these people, they are actually wearing blue color shirts, clothing, so I'm going to dab some ultramarine here and there across the scene. Okay, for the building, I think some of the side of the buildings, they are actually gray, so I'm using burnt sienna with ultramarine just to give it a very light wash. That is too dark, so I'm going to wash my brush and add a bit more water to it because it's not supposed to be so dark, it's supposed to be quite faint. Same thing here. Alright, now this is the scary part where I add in the shadows, the dark areas. So I'm going to use a lot of water because there is a lot of black areas in the scene, and I'm going to use ultramarine again. Use a lot of ultramarine because I need it to be very dark, and I'm going to use some burnt sienna, put it down here, and put ultramarine up there, and I want a bit of red here. So now I'm going to do basically just color the top part here, and that is almost black, so I'm going to add a bit more burnt sienna to that and try and dry my brush properly before I do it. So this part here is almost black. Sometimes I like to add a bit of red to it, and this part here. So for this area, this is going to be almost black. And this is the area where I said it's dark because it's under the shadow. And for this is actually some sort of wood, and since it's wood, I'm going to use a lot of burnt sienna. Let me add more water because this area is really large. So if I just use burnt sienna, it's going to give me a single flat color, and that is not something that is interesting. So I try to basically add some variation to it by basically charging in some additional colors using ultramarine. I think I made a mistake around, this should be white color. I made a mistake there. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm just gonna wait for this to dry before I add in more another layer of shadow, because this whole part here is almost black. I think the areas here, they are dark enough. Maybe a bit darker here. That might be good. So I'm going to make that a bit darker here. This paper is only 160 GSM, so if I put a layer of wash that's so wet on it, the paper is going to buckle, and sometimes when the paper buckles, it's very difficult to create a flat wash, and the colors may not appear the way you want them to be because the water would flow to the lowest point. So let's see how this goes. Let me add this part here to, oops, another mistake, accidental splatter. Personally, for me, I find it a bit difficult to mix pure black with ultramarine. So usually when I want to mix a really dark black, I would actually go for phthalo blue instead. There's actually a building right behind, and I want to give it a bit more contrast, especially when this person here, it's this Santa Claus here. I haven't colored the face yet, so I want to do it right now. And this guy here as well. Okay. And for the background, again, I'm going to use some phthalo blue just to give it some contrast, to give people the idea that this is actually the sky. And now I'm putting the finishing touches to the sketch, trying to find out places where I need to put in additional colors. Alright, this is almost dry. Let's zoom in to take a closer look. All the area in the shadow, they are almost black. I think this is a very nice contrast against bright objects, bright elements, for example the people that are standing in front. And I like to draw people overlapping the scene because it gives you that depth of field. So here we have a big person, here we have a medium-sized person, and the smaller people here are at the back. It gives you the foreground, background feeling. So that's a nice sense of depth there. The lanterns, well, I colored the windows and the lanterns in one shade of red, so they almost blend together quite nicely. So if I were to improve on this, I would probably add some shadows to the lantern just beneath it, but I'm going to leave it as it is today. Notice the nice beautiful granulation from French ultramarine. I added some warm red to it to give that subtle color blend so that it's not a flat shade of color like this side here. And this area, there are a lot of people. It's very difficult to see the details of all these people, but generally speaking, when I'm looking at this sketch from afar, I can sort of tell that they are people, and that's good enough for me. This is meant to be a quick sketch, not a very technical sketch, so my art looks a bit more loose here. And that's the God of Fortune and his friend, the Santa Claus, standing on top of the roof here. This area here is also very dark, very black. So let's zoom out again and take a look at the clouds. So I'm not sure if I'm satisfied with the clouds. I perhaps need to practice more. But this paper is a bit difficult to work with because once I lay down the color just now, as you can see, the color just sticks onto the paper immediately. Perhaps it's because of the color that I'm using, which is phthalo blue. It's supposed to be a staining color, so it's very difficult to lift off the color once that color touches the paper. And if you let phthalo blue onto the table or onto your clothes, it's going to be very difficult to clean that off. Or even if you stain phthalo blue on a brush like this, it's going to be difficult to clean off because phthalo blue is a very staining color. So that's all for this sketch today. It's really much more comfortable to be able to color this at home than out under the sun at Chinatown. So thank you for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comment section below. See you in the next video. Bye!